Hello and welcome to Real Time Recorded. I'm Dave Michaels, and I have with me Zeus Caravala. Hello, Zeus.
Hey, Dave. How's your week been?
Today we got a lot of news from Google, but before we get into Google, let's talk a little bit about calling. This is week 36, by the way. I don't think I said that. Week 36, 2021. And there's just been a lot of news about calling because it's kind of weird because everyone says calling and voice is dead, but I guess not. It was back in July that Microsoft, was actually Satya himself, said that Microsoft Teams users placed 80 million calls in a month. I know I kind of attacked that or addressed that in my newsletter. I think they've kind of changed their story a little bit on that. They clarified it was peer-to-peer calls, which is a little more plausible than PSTN calls. But anyway, 80 million is a big number. At least I thought it was a big number. This week, Cisco announced that they hit 8 billion monthly calls. I'll turn this over to you in just a second, so I'll just hit the headlines here. And then Zoom recently announced that it's hit the first company to hit 2 million paid seats. I can't remember first company to hit it was it within a year? I can't remember what the time frame was, but some record. And then also this week, Google announced that they're going to make calling free and available within Gmail. A lot of headlines. Zeus, is voice dead?
Yeah, well, voice is certainly not dead. In fact, I talked to Larissa Horton from Cisco about this a little while ago, who's the GM of voice there. And I sort of joked and I go, that can't be very exciting, being the GM of voice, right? But, she and I were talking about there's still a lot of...
I'm sure that went over really well. So yes,
But there is a ton of innovation going on in it, right? There's still a lot of workloads that rely on voice. Even a lot of, campus workers and things still rely on calling. And so calling is not dead. It's nowhere near being dead. In fact, I was looking at some data that looked at preference of channel for consumers across all different age demographics. And of course, elderly people prefer email, younger people prefer social media. But the only one that showed up in the top three for all age demographics was voice, right?
Yeah.
So calling, calling is long from dead. And I think the numbers that we're seeing, right, 8 billion monthly calls and things like that, I agree that the Microsoft number is a little dubious, right? So I don't even know if people just try it out and see if it works, if that counts as a call. It might with Microsoft, since.
Well, I think the Microsoft, like Google, the internal Teams calling without PSTN, I think that's free to all users, and so it doesn't really surprise me too much if you're not going to count PSTN. And that's kind of one of the challenges with all of these stats, is they're really hard to compare. Now, you don't have to look too hard if you're comparing 80 million, say, to 8 billion, but they all measure differently. Now, these are Cisco and Microsoft are both monthly, which is nice, but we don't really know what's included. Cisco's got this huge installed base that they acquired from BroadSoft. They've got their WebEx calling services. They're now combining the two with the WebEx calling to that BroadSoft base. So there's just all kinds of numbers that they can tap into. So it's really hard to get an apples to apples or oranges to oranges comparison. But certainly the fact that Zoom has been able to add on as paid seats 2 million paid users to their email subscription. I want to point out that when it comes to PSTN calling, that Microsoft and Zoom only even offer PSTN calling once you have the base package. You can't just start with voice like you could in the old days, or like with Cisco or with most of the UCaaS companies. You almost start with voice and then add things like video and stuff as add-ons. Microsoft and Zoom do it the other way around. But I really wanted to talk a lot about Google, and so I want to kind of focus a little bit more here on this Google announcement. So Google's confused us a lot with their video strategies because they've had all these different video apps. Now we're going to get into a little bit more about their different kinds of chat and messaging apps. But with calling in particular, it's kind of interesting because they're going to bring this calling feature right into Gmail as a native Gmail service. I would have thought they might have put, Google Voice in, or voice enable, or call enable Google Chat, but no, they're kind of going about this differently. They said, in fact, one of the complaints about Google Chat I covered in the newsletter last month is that you can't call. If you're chatting with someone and you want to actually go to real time, you have to put in a link that you can go meet at, literally meet at, but you can't actually just call somebody. And so they're not putting that in chat, although now they've said they will. but they're putting it in Gmail first. They're really making Gmail the center of the universe.
Yeah, well, it makes sense for Google, right? They had it in Hangouts, and the adoption was pretty light. If they were to put it back in Chat, I don't know why you would expect the adoption to be any more, right? Google, Google, Google's a funny company because we talk every year about this is going to be your Google collab, and it never really is because they can't ever get their act together. But the one app they do have that's an anchor is Gmail, and so the more they build into Gmail, the more likely it is that people will use it. So I think if you can call directly out of it versus having to go to a separate app, I think Google's got a shot at finally actually making a dent in that market. And I've been waiting for them to really step. With all the money Google has, you would expected them to be a bigger player by now. And I think for them, being Gmail centric, probably is the right thing for them to do.
Yeah, well, I get that. I'm just kind of confused because they have Google Voice. We don't really hear about Google Voice. They've completely redone meetings. They've completely redone chat. They're going to launch Spaces, which we're going to talk about here coming up. And so if you're going to put in calling, why not put it in one of those? Why put calling in Gmail that actually can't make a PSTN call? It just seems a little strange to me. But bottom line is it's more functionality for free, and it's in a logical place, as you say. So let's move on to the next topic, which is Google Spaces. So Chat had a feature called Rooms. So basically, you've got your chat feature where you could have chats, you could have group chats. But if you wanted to create a room, let's say a topic as opposed to a certain number of people, that people can come and join that group or not, they've decided to pull that out of Chat into a whole new app called Spaces. It's not quite out yet. At least I can't get it on my Google account, but it's coming over the next few months, starting with Enterprise, rolling out to Gmail users after that. And the idea is this is their version of Slack, right? It's got threading, it's got search and discovery features, it's got nesting, and so it's really their version of Slack, and it's called Spaces, and it's now included to all Workspace users, or soon will be.
Yeah, not to be confused with the Avaya Spaces, but I'm curious as to who the target audience is for this, because if you're a big Microsoft shop, you're using Teams, right? And if you do happen to use Google Doc and Google Gmail, you're probably using Slack, right? And so this can compete with Slack. But if you've ever talked to companies that have tried to migrate from Slack to anything, it's impossible because of all the data that's already in Slack, right? And so I do think Google's way late to this, right? And so I don't know if the world needs another space or chat type application or messaging app, and it makes sense. I think they need it for kind of completeness of solution, but I think for them it winds up becoming an add-on feature versus the lead feature, which is what it was for Teams and Slack, right? So, but I do think that I'm not sure who they're going to get to migrate away from something, because as far as I know, most businesses already picked the platform they're using. So getting them to migrate away would be
well. The issue there is that it's free, right? And it's the same as the Teams logic. And so if you're already paying your Google Workspace Enterprise subscription, now you get this. And so just like with Teams, why are we paying for other services when we have this one free? And also, just like the other things we just talked about with Google, it's all Gmail centric. So it starts in Gmail. Yeah, you may end up opening up separate tabs and whatnot. But I actually think it's pretty extraordinary that Google does all of this without a client. They do it all in a web browser. In the Microsoft world now, you've got two clients. You've got Outlook and you've got Teams. That raises the requirements of your desktop. It's two big fat clients. And Microsoft couldn't roll out a brand new service like this without rolling out a major update and software deployment, where Google's just kind of like, hey, ta-da, next time you hit refresh, you're gonna have Spaces there. So
I think pound for pound, the Google Suite's actually quite a bit better than Microsoft's, but the historic install base of Windows is so much bigger than Chrome, for instance. But you're right. Their ability to innovate and drop new features in, if they were just a little earlier with the stuff, I think it would help them a lot. So I've called Teams a fast follower. Google's a slow follower.
They were early. It was called Hangouts, but well, that's a separate topic. So it's a good thing they renamed. It's a good thing they renamed Rooms, because now we're going to talk about Rooms, which is not the old rooms, but the new rooms, which is the for meeting rooms for Google Meet specifically. About a year ago, Google introduced the Series 1. So to your point, a little late, a year ago introducing the Series 1. And so that was a Lenovo room kit. And so a year later, we're introducing two new Series 1 room systems. Well, I'm not sure I could describe it that way. One is a desktop system. It's called the Desk 27. And the other one is the Board 65. I think it's, I think it's the Board 65, and it's kind of a replacement to their Jamboard. And it's an all-in-one that can either be on the wall or on a cart. So they also announced that they're going to support Logitech's Rally systems in Google Meet rooms. And so I think all of these, there's one more piece here we'll get to in just a second, but I think all of these first three announcements are really important because I think Google's been kind of behind in the room system category. What do you think? What do you think of that Desk 27, Zeus?
Yeah, well, they have been behind in the in the room category, and given we're moving to this era of hybrid work, I think if you're going to be a collab vendor, you have to have rooms now, right? I just don't see get around that. I don't know. I think that the Desk 27 is I think it's a pretty cool product. Again. I guess if you're committed to all Google, you'll take a look at this. I'll be really curious to see if they can make inroads in the actual physical meeting space, though, because that's an area that they're again pretty late to, where there's already a lot of well-established vendors. But I think the partners they have, I think one of the approaches they take, which is different than what Microsoft does, they actually let those partners use their unique capabilities to create a bit of different experiences, right? So like a Poly Teams room is the same experience as a Logi Team room, where I believe in the Google case, the different vendors actually bring different experiences in, which is something that I think is important.
So I think these desktop appliances are really kind of interesting. There was a category that didn't really exist, a year and a half ago. Yeah. I think the first one I saw was the Cisco Desk series. Unfortunately, the Cisco Desk versus the Google Desk, they really can't come up with any unique names, either one of these companies. But and neither one of these, by the way, are desks. They're video systems, so that could be a little confusion. You would think like a logical accessory would be either a light or possibly a chair with a desk, but who knows? But anyway, they have Poly just came out with, I think it's called the P21, which is kind of another smart monitor. That's not actually an appliance, but it's the all-in-one monitor display. I think it's an interesting pivot because of the pandemic. We've had less emphasis on room systems and more on personal systems, and I think it's appropriate. These work, of course, in a small room. They work at a home. They work at an office. I think it's an interesting thing. The Google price point, I think, is just below $2,000, which is pretty attractive, I think, for a 27-inch display. Google is such a software company that in the analyst briefing, they didn't know the resolution of the hardware. They didn't know the desktop resolution. These are actually made by Avocor for Google, but they have the Google software running on them. I think the board is interesting. I love the big whiteboard format. There's a lot of different ways to solve the whiteboard problem. The camera over the board, the all-in-one like we're talking about here. A couple of vendors. You've got the Surface Hub. You've got the Cisco WebEx board. A number of vendors are doing that, so I think it's a nice addition. But the big announcement, which we haven't got to yet, is that Google and Cisco announced that their room systems will be interoperable, natively interoperable. And that, I think this is a really significant and interesting announcement. Yes?
Yeah, I do too, right? Obviously, especially when companies go through mergers and, or even just departmental buys, you do wind up, almost every large enterprise I know has a mix of different technologies. And so what winds up happening is you've either got to throw away the old one to standardize on one, or you've got to just go with multiple vendors, which drives companies crazy. So I think, both Cisco and Google have been pretty committed to try and create some interoperability. And I think that the fact that you can actually natively start a Google meeting on a Cisco device or a Cisco meeting on a Google device, is only upside for the customer, right? And I do believe the vendors historically, Dave, have been almost misguided in their thinking of trying to keep everything locked down and proprietary. history has shown that when you open things up, it drives much better adoption, right? So what we want is more people using video on more devices, right? And so I think the openness, if all the vendors were open, there'd be no, you'd see these things deployed everywhere, and then, the best vendor wins, and versus having them locked down. And so I think that's I think that's going to be a continued trend that we see, over the next year or so.
I think it's a really big and interesting move, and I love the alliances that are forming. Companies like Logi, Poly, and Neat. Their equipment works in both Microsoft and Zoom, and now you've got Cisco and Google forming their alliance. And I think this interoperability is really important. I don't think anybody really wants to buy a room system that only works with one vendor, and so I think this is really important and really strategic moves for both companies. Who do you think wins more here, Cisco or Google? Do you have any thoughts on that, if their systems become interoperable?
That's a good question. Cisco's already got such a big install base. I think, short term, I think it helps Google more, because I do think maybe, Cisco's got a lot of devices out there already, and it might give customers especially ones that are using Gmail in the Google Suite, a way to be able to try it on their Cisco device, right? And so it's obviously good for both companies, but I do think it could help legitimize Google as a real enterprise class vendor, because most of the companies that I know that use Google tend to be smaller, on the small side. So if they do want to validate themselves up market, this actually could help them do that.
Yeah, I think it's good for Cisco and helps them sell more hardware. I also think it's really important for Google because they have really been an island. Other than Pexip, there really hasn't been any way to interoperate with Google. At least the other ones, the other vendors have some limit of interop with SIP or something, but Google's really been closed, and so I think this is a fairly significant crossroad for Google.
Well, that was a lot of news, Dave. Let's put a wrap on week 36. We'll be back next week with week 37, and Dave, Monday, Tuesday, week 37, of course, is Zoomtopia. So
I have a feeling there might be some news at Zoomtopia.
Probably a little bit. So I'm looking forward to that. And then 2 weeks later, we have Enterprise Connect. So I'm going to be there. You're going to be there?
Maybe we'll do a real-time recorded live from Orlando.
Yeah, we should actually do that. So that would be week 39, I think, or something like that. So anyway, stay tuned for that.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.